T for Texas, T for Tennessee, T for Texas, T for Tennessee, T for Liz Truss, that gal who made a wreck out of the economy. And welcome to Film Crack Crack. With your three yodeling stars, I guess. That's me, Clive Davis, my regular co-host.
Yodel-a-hee, yodel-a-hee, it's me, Nick.
And today's very special guest curator. Who are you, sir?
Why, hello, everyone. My name is Geno Cuddy.
Fantastic. Right, so yeah, Film Crack Crack, where we talk, have a bit of crack about some films that have fallen through the cracks. And, you know, a man who's fond of cracks, of the cinematic variety, is our very own Geno Cuddy. And Geno Cuddy has a YouTube channel called Geno's House of Rare Films. And unlike most people's YouTube channels, it is actually an extremely valuable resource. And I don't know how many films are up there altogether. There's a few dozen by now, right, Geno?
Yes, I don't have the exact number, but I would say that it's upwards of at least a good 50 or so, maybe even more. Again, I don't have an exact figure in front of me, so I apologize for that.
That's okay. And we'll get more to this, I think, on a one by one basis as we go through what we're going to talk about in terms of exactly where they're sourced from or stuff like that, because that's kind of interesting as well. But basically, of this collection, we asked Geno to curate a few, because all of these films are, well, pretty much largely unavailable to view outside of Geno's channel.
They very much fit the parameters of this show. They're all films that you're not going to find anywhere else, and many of them have been unseen by the majority of people for a very long time. And
they're all relatively short. They're mostly short subjects, featurettes at the most. So we got Geno chose 5 for us to discuss today. And actually, we probably should have done this before we started, but we haven't really discussed in what order we want to talk about. But so over to you, Geno. Do you have an order you'd like to discuss these in, or which one we'd like to do first, at least?
I'll leave that up to you.
Okay, nice.
I'm up for doing Belle of Samoa first, just because like the list that you sent to me, Clive, was kind of in order of date a little bit, and Belle of Samoa was the first one on the list. Well,
let's start with the 2 Clark and McCullers then.
Okay,
if that's okay with you, Geno.
Yeah, and, you know, I didn't do this consciously, but the majority of the films that we're going to be discussing tonight are from the year 1929. So I guess, like Prince, we could celebrate like it's 1929.
So yeah, this was I have to say these gentlemen are brand new to me. This comedy duo, and then I'll just actually, through reading some of your Facebook posts, Geno, then I sort of realized that there's a tragic ending to this comedy duo. So I kind of went and looked a little bit on the Wikipedia page. But I will say I did like the idea of drawing your glasses onto your face with like what looks like a Sharpie or whatever the equivalent at the time was. In this first one, especially in Belle of Samoa, I was like, that's an awesome gag, right? Just having drawn on glasses.
Well, obviously you haven't done your homework, Nick, because we did a whole bunch of Clark and McCullough films on Magic Morning Wood.
Okay, that's an episode I've got to catch up with then. Okay.
A while back. Yeah. So yes, Clark and McCullough. I mean, yeah, we don't necessarily want to go over this same ground that we have But yeah, a comedy team, yeah, pretty much lost to the sands of time. I have to confess, I didn't know anything about Clark and McCullough until Geno put them on my radar. I think you suggested, and initially we did some Wheeler and Woolsey films, right, on the Magic Morning Wood, me and Ron, and then you were like, well, how about one strata further down, because Wheeler and Woolsey do kind of, some people might have memories of Wheeler and Woolsey, and then Clark and McCullough are, pretty much forgotten, I think.
And is this partly because their stuff was a bit more risque and it wasn't going to be shown in the way that like the Stooges or Marx Brothers stuff could be shown on TV, whereas like I have to say, Belle of Samoa is damn sexy. I was not expecting to be titillated by a comedy short from 1929 to the extent that I was, but I also thought like this is definitely more. This is almost like the beginnings of sex comedy. And I thought, yeah, this probably wouldn't fly on a Saturday morning wedged between episodes of Scooby-Doo and something else, right? So Geno, is that why they're less known? Because they weren't packaged for TV in that way that, some of the other comedians would have been?
Yeah, that's one reason. Their films are just so wild and so over the top, madcap and surreal. I mean, especially when you get to their RKO films. Clive and Ron did review quite a bit of them on the Magic Morning Wood. So anybody who is interested in learning and hearing more about Clark and McCullough, I highly insist you checking out Clive and Ron's episode of Magic Morning Wood, where I asked them to review some Clark and McCullough shorts. I also myself did a podcast on them with my friend Phil Hall on the online movie show, which you could find on SoundCloud. So I highly recommend you guys checking that out as well.
Yeah, I second that one. I listened to that as well.
And so they were really over the top, and there was a lot of risque content in their films. I mean, they are, in my opinion, they are like Wheeler and Woolsey bumped up to 11. Like the volume turned up all the way to like 11. They are just really out there, really off the wall. And a lot of people have unfairly said that it was mostly dominated by Bobby Clark, and he does dominate a lot of the comedy. But McCullough has his own bits of business that he does contribute to the team. And we probably should discuss a little bit of biographical background on them. We don't have to go into everything, but they were a couple of friends from Springfield, Ohio, childhood friends who first started out as clowns, then eventually became burlesque performers, hence probably a lot of the racy double entendre dialogue that Bobby Clark came up with. And they performed in vaudeville, Broadway, off-Broadway, and they were big headliners on stage for years and years and years. And that's why the Fox Studios, and actually there's going to be a bit of a rarity that I'm going to be sharing coming up on the channel here. There's actually a rare piece of film that we've acquired from the South Carolina University, where essentially it's the grand opening of the Fox Movietone Studios, and you see Clark and McCullough standing outside and amongst a crowd of people, and they perform a little routine, and it's a bunch of pomp and circumstance for the opening of the studio, and it's fantastic footage to watch. And so that's why Fox Movietone, they snapped them up, because they were some of the biggest headliners on Broadway. So and they sunk so much money into these films. I mean, Belle of Samoa is billed as the first musical comedy of the screen, and that could very well be true.
It's interesting you mentioned Fox Movietone as well. So worth mentioning. So we should also say that the films up on Geno's channels also always feature written intros with some context, which is most welcome. So as per your note, this was originally set to be part of a larger feature, right? The Fox Movietone Follies of 1929. but they decided, for whatever reason, you know, oh, this is strong enough to stand on its own, right? So it was excised from that. I mean, I don't know if was Fox Movie Follies of 1929 ever completed, and is it extant or?
I think it was completed, and I think it was released. However, and this is the sad thing that we have to discuss when we discuss the Fox films, at least of Clark and McCullough, is their horrifyingly horrible survival rate. Because there's only 2 of their films that survive from the Fox period, and that's because there was an awful vault fire that occurred at the Fox Studios in 1937, and that destroyed a lot of early Fox films and wiped them from existence. And thank God for private collectors. And I think that, you know, we need to do our due diligence, and we couldn't complete this podcast without at least bringing up my dear friend, Mr. Ralph Celentano, who has graciously opened up his mint of great films and comedy shorts and rare subjects. And he has allowed me to be the exclusive distributor of his releases. I mean, I will be fair and I will be honest. There was a brief time where I wasn't able to distribute his content. Therefore, a friend of mine picked up the slack, but I have since returned to posting his films full time. And so I am so gracious to film collectors like Ralph Celentano, who have made these films available again, especially considering that the survival rate of these things is ghastly. So yeah, big tip of the hat to Ralph Celentano. As a matter of fact, I wanted to actually get him on here tonight and do a little bit of an interview, but he's going through quite a bit right now, and I'm not going to get into it because I don't think he'd care for me sharing his personal life with anybody. But he is going through quite a bit right now, so you know, prayers go up for Mr. Celentano. And just thank you, Ralph, for allowing me to distribute this content. I greatly appreciate it.
So yeah, so most of the films we're going to be talking about today come from the Ralph Celentano collections, and it's worth. I mean, it's interesting, and certainly if in some future date where he's feeling more up to the task, it would be actually fantastic to have him on to be interviewed. So I don't want to jump the gun on that and have you speak on his behalf necessarily, Geno, but is it possible, can you talk a little bit about, because obviously most people would know who Ralph Celentano anyway is, like what's his background, how long's he been collecting could you give us a little potted kind of Ralph Celentano kind of history? Like, I mean, he has like a vault full of old film reels, or he just has a closet with things he's rescued from somewhere, or where is he getting this stuff from? How is Ralph Celentano plugged into this motherlode of kind of lost films?
Well, Ralph Celentano is a great gentleman from the Massachusetts area, and he has been collecting films for well over 60 plus years. And he has his specialty is classic comedy shorts, because that's what he's most attracted to, be it from RKO, Educational Pictures, Columbia, you name it, he probably has it. But his horizons do broaden. I mean, as a matter of fact, we're going to be discussing some films that aren't comedies at all tonight on this program, and some of those come from Ralph's collection as well. And he just had a fascination with film from an early age, watching a lot of it on television, because Ralph grew up in the 1950s when there was just a glut of classic films going straight to television, because television needed content to air. And so a lot of rare subjects got aired during that time. As we veered a little bit more into the decades, a lot of this stuff went away from the public consciousness. But during the 1950s, it wasn't too uncommon to turn on a television set and see a Clark and McCullough comedy, or a Leon Errol short, or a Tom Kennedy and Chick Chandler comedy. So Ralph really had a fascination with this material quite early on, and he collected a lot of this material. He befriended a lot of these people, including my friend Ray Cabana, who supplied one of the films that we're going to be discussing tonight. So basically, he's been a film collector for over 60 plus years and has a wealth of knowledge on the material, as well as just a wealth of material in general.
And obviously, these are celluloid reels that he's collecting, right? I mean, I think for younger people, even my age and even younger, right? Like we were kind of the very tail end of film, like when the teacher might roll in an actual film projector occasionally and put a big reel-to-reel on it and show you some educational short or something. But younger people, I think, would have no context for the fact that we're talking about actual reels of film that he's collecting from various places, right? Estate sales or wherever else you go buy your...
And also other collectors too, and trading with a lot of collectors as well. And I'm also going to plug another program. For more on film collecting in general, I highly recommend people checking out my friend Ben Minot's YouTube video. Ben Minot being the host of the Oddity Archive, so search it up by Oddity Archive. And he did a show on FBI film raids and film collecting. And some of my friends who are film collectors did face a lot of that. Getting their doors knocked on by the FBI and saying, "Hey, do you have these films? And if so, we're going to have to confiscate them or whatever." And so they faced a lot of that, especially if it was on 35 millimeter, because that's considered to be a theatrical reel that should have been returned to the studio or whatever. So it was very risky being a film collector back in the 70s and 80s. But people like Ralph Celentano and my friend Ray Cabana, they braved the elements and they collected all this stuff. And thank God that they did, or else half the material that is shown on my channel would never be seen again. So thank God for people like Ralph Celentano, and they deserve more praise. And when TCM is celebrating, historians and film historians and everything, they should also be, in my honest opinion, celebrating the film collectors and the people who actually went out there and preserved this material and collected it. And it may not, these Clark and McCullough films and the films we're discussing tonight certainly aren't, anything like London After Midnight or anything that's highly sought after, but they are worthwhile subjects, and they are, worthy of preservation and discussion and analysis themselves. So I think that they deserve.
There's an analogy there as well. There's a similar story as to what happened in the UK with the BBC, for example, up until a certain point, even up until, I want to say the early 70s, maybe even, the BBC were, reusing tape and taping over things and had no concept of keeping things for generations.
Doctor Who.
Who.
It's gone.
And episodes of Till Death Us Do Part as well. The program.
Loads of things are just lost, and again, at a certain point, that it were people who did have in their hands, in private hands, had to keep quiet about it until, the BBC with the help of the BFI officially put out kind of like a what's the word I'm looking for? Not an armistice. What is it when you can give the guns back without any legal repercussions? What's that word I'm looking for? Anyway,
yes.
Anyway, there was a period of time where they said, okay, just bring that stuff back, and we're not gonna, take it to court or anything. We really want it back in, because, well, this is the next question I had as well, because obviously these people are really, really important, but most people, there's very little they can do with limited funds. And I don't know about Ralph Celentano, for example, but obviously, Geno, you don't own a lab, you don't own so what you're doing is the best that you can do with what's at hand for you, right? But I'm wondering, are there like I mean, it seems to me as if Ralph Celentano's sitting on like a treasure trove that, you know, someone, whether it be some boutique Blu-ray label or some institution or a museum, should be banging on his door and please allow us to preserve this stuff, you know, while we still can. So I mean, are there other people? Is that the case? Are there people aware of the treasures that he has, or is it just down to you and a few other kind of people giving up their time and energy?
There are some outfits out there that are aware of his rather voluminous collection. I mean, he does have a working relationship with the Library of Congress, and they've preserved quite a number of his films. And he has been approached by outfits like Alpha Video, aka oldies.com. However, the problem that Ralph has with outfits like oldies.com and Alpha Video is that you know, when he's investing over $1,000 or close to $1,000 worth of his own money into collecting and preserving this material, and then Alpha Video goes and turns around and sells a DVD for like only $3. He's not reaping any of that, and he's not making back any of his investment in that. The thing is a lot of this material, and fellow film historian and one of my friends, Ben Medell, has remarked on this, that a lot of the material that we're preserving isn't necessarily going to make it on a Blu-ray per se and be successful. Like, it's not going to like a lot of this material is unfortunately going to make big business. No, because a lot of it is quite obscure. I mean, you're talking about boutique labels. I mean, I'm not sure if Ralph would consider something like that. But the problem is that, you know, it's always a huge gamble when you're sending away film reels and things to be transferred. I mean, as a matter of fact, there is a film on my channel that was in Ralph's collection called Seesaw, which stars Baby Rosemary, or later to be known as simply Rosemary, who starred in the Dick Van Dyke program. And the sad story about that is that when Ralph went to go and have that film transferred to show it to Rosemary before she passed away, it unfortunately got lost in the mail. And thusly, that digital copy that's up on my YouTube channel is the only surviving version of that film in existence now, because there is no film print anymore. Because once something is at the post office and it's being held there, you know, if it's not claimed, it gets tossed away in the trash. And so that's probably in all likelihood what happened to Seesaw. So it's very, 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 very tricky. And Ralph is gambling, you know, a lot by sending his films out and sending the stuff in the mail. And I want to, again, thank him for taking these tremendous risks and sending this material out there to get transferred. Because it is risky, because there are times when people haven't gotten films back, and there have been times when people have received damaged films that, you know, weren't properly maintained back. And so it's really a gamble when you're sending this material out there.
Yeah, I'd also add that there's also
similar thing, right? They hang on to their blues records and because
well, this is what I was going to say was that actually there is a chunk of the collecting community that's really adverse to sharing, or really adverse to they're like, I own this, it's mine, it's for me, I spent the money, and the rest of the world, screw them, they're not going to see this. You know, okay, fine, whatever, I suppose they have the right to do that, but I'm always really impressed by somebody who collects and then takes that and then is, you know, willing to share it, right, and willing to let the world see what they have collected. And so hats off for that, because that's a huge thing.
Tangent on a tangent, but just while kind of we're on it, I mean, the other way I suppose you could go about it would be to get into the collection and to kind of sort it out into a series of different categories, you know, of things that belong together, and then maybe there'd be a leftover little pile of odds and ends, miscellaneous or whatever, and then for each category, maybe propose some sort of DVD or Blu-ray collection, and then take it to the people who are interested in the form of like a Kickstarter campaign or something like that, right? Where you wait until you actually have the funds available to do it, and then if you can get it, then you do it, and then you don't lose any money, right? People have paid up front for the product. That might be one way of going about it. So at least you'd be able to get some of it out in wider circulation and without Ralph or whoever taking a financial hit, you know. Again, you're not going to get rich off it. I don't think anyone's going to get rich off it, but that's not the point, right? I would imagine, like any other true fan, he'd rather spread the love, right? He just doesn't want to end up in the poorhouse while doing that, right?
Right. I mean, Ralph basically told this to me, and he basically told me, Geno, I'm getting older, and I want people to see this material. I'm not going to live forever. I want to see this material out there, and I want to see people enjoy the material while I'm still living. And what else do you say to that? That's such a great act of generosity, and I think that all film collectors should follow by example, in my honest opinion. If you have something, share it. That's my opinion. Like, and that's even how I feel about, the bigger studios, who have, this stuff just rotting away in their vaults.
Yep.
That's why I uploaded So This Is Africa, a film that we reviewed on this program a while back, because Sony, who controls that material, has no interest in releasing it in any form. Not on a streaming service, not on physical media, nowhere. They won't even partner up with a boutique DVD label to have that released so that it's out of their hands. So that's why it's up to people like myself and people like Ralph and such to get this material out there and release it. I mean, the unfortunate thing is we are sort of confined to what is in the public domain, because there is some of this material is still under copyright, and YouTube's algorithm system is so sensitive that even if you were to show it backwards, they could still get you for it. I found that out the hard way. We are doing a service, and we hope that people are enjoying the service. I'm not going to say that my presentations are perfect. I'm not going to say that these films are award winners, but we are hoping that people are enjoying them. In the niche, minority of the people that these films appeal to, we are hoping that people are enjoying the films and that they are appreciated.
Yeah, well, you certainly are in this space, at the very least. So
are we going to talk about these belly buttons now?
I was going to say, about a million
belly buttons.
ago, we were talking about the Belle of Samoa. And it's funny we kind of front-loaded this, because actually when you get to, there's not much of a plot really, right? Clark and McCullough seek entrance to a temple of sexy Samoan
maidens,
women, at the risk of being beheaded. In they go. Chaos ensues. That's about it, really, plot-wise. But it's a lot of fun. I enjoyed this. I suppose if you cut off the tops and tails of Geno's intro, and it runs about 16 minutes, something like that. And well, it'd be interesting, Nick, actually, to see your take on this, because having watched a whole bunch of Clark and McCullough stuff now, this comes somewhere in the middle for me. Like, it's fun, but it's not one of the better films.
Okay.
But as someone just totally new to Clark and McCullough, how did you react to Belle of Samoa?
Well, as I said, this one more than any of them appealed to my prurient interests. I have to say, I've always had a certain soft spot for sexy vintage ladies, and so yeah. The comedy was fine. I did really like the fez. I liked the look of kind of Clark. The fast talking stuff was was fine. I did feel a bit sorry for his as I said, his partner, partly because of what I had read, but also partly because he does seem to get almost a bit trod upon by, you know, he has a bit less to do. Although, as Geno said, he does have his moments. But yeah, when all those flappers kind of ladies came out and started dancing, I was glued to my YouTube screen. I have to say, and I also was impressed and interested to see that it. I mean, am I wrong? But are they not? A lot of them actually seem to be Polynesian dancers. I mean, I know there's a few actors who are obviously white actors in makeup and stuff like that, but it seemed like a lot of the actual, like, and the male dancers as well, in that kind of like more war dance kind of thing. It brought to mind like those scenes in Hobbs and Shaw. If you saw, Clive, that's probably not your cup of tea. That film with The Rock.
No, Jason Statham's in it, so that's all right.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but anyway, there is some Polynesian kind of war dancing in that, and I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was impressed by how sexy those girls were.
Especially Lois Moran, the central girl, wearing very, very little.
Yeah, great belly button, sort of like gratuitous panty shots, all kinds of stuff I don't expect to see in a. I guess this is pre-code, right?
Yeah.
Right. The deeper that you go into pre-code, right, and the deeper that you go into pre-code film, you're bound to see a lot more of that.
Right.
If you go too deep, you end up watching things like Mexican Chihuahua and Smoke
Maniac
20s. Yeah.
Don't forget Maniac, where a cat's eyeball is squeezed out and a girl's boobs are suddenly shown out of nowhere. You're like, what the?
Well, that's an interesting one. That's because that's neither here nor there code-wise, because I think that's just after the code came in, and that was distributed, on the independent circuit. So
okay,
that's how that managed to avoid. Yeah, no, the Hays Code. Maniac would be about 5 minutes long if
but I have to say there's some amazing. It's like the girls are doing this flexi drumming at the end, where they're bending over backwards and drumming on the drums, and all that stuff was top notch. So I have to say I really enjoyed this first, in a way, maybe because it hit these two. It had the comedy, and it also had this kind of more the sexy elements that I appreciate.
How about you, Geno? Can you raise the bar a little bit and not just
sorry, not
there's proto porn in the way Nick has.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's an honest response, and I appreciate that. You're filthy.
I mean, hey, I'm a man, who can appreciate a little cheesecake myself. So I'm right there with Nick when I'm watching this film. Clark and McCullough are fantastic and hilarious in their own right. But when Lois Moran is on screen, my eyes are glued. So
forget you two, Clark and McCullough.
It's interesting too. It's much more a stage production actually than the other Clark and McCullough one, which feels more like a movie. This really feels like it is a stage show that somebody has set a camera up and filmed.
But that makes sense if you think of it as it was going to be part of this Fox Movie Tone Follies, because those Follies films were often, parts of them did seem like big extravaganza stage
productions.
Films. Yeah. Anyway, Geno, carry on. If you have
you were asking earlier if there were some genuine Polynesian people within this. I think Filoe and her dancers, I think, were authentic.
It seems like it.
Yeah. So, but overall, I like Bella Samoa. I like Clark and McCullough in general, and it's such a shame that they've been forgotten. And I think it's also a shame, and I'm going to step onto my little soapbox here, but I think it's a shame that whenever we talk about, the linkage between comedy and depression, that we don't discuss Paul McCullough. For those of you who don't know, Paul McCullough, in 1936, he suffered a nervous breakdown, and really what I think it was a case of depression that he had. And he admitted himself to a sanitarium, and shortly thereafter, when he was released from the sanitarium, I believe it's been variously noted that he was driving around with Bobby Clark. That's not true. His friend or a psychiatrist, that may be true. But he was traveling with somebody, and he was in Medford, Massachusetts, and he visited a barbershop. And when he went into this barbershop, he decided to get himself a nice shave and a haircut. And the unfortunate thing is when the barber's back was turned, Paul McCullough grabbed the razor and slit both his throat and his wrists, and died a couple of days later from his injuries. He was only in his, I believe, early 50s at the time. And Bobby Clark was heartbroken. Everybody was heartbroken at this loss of this man who brought so much laughter to everybody. I mean, we all talk about Robin Williams, and we all talk about modern day celebrities, but we do have to bring up the fact that this isn't new. This has been something that's run rampant, and since we're in the month of November, and I have the mustache for Movember, which, brings to the forefront, men's mental health and everything else. And I'm a big advocate for men, discussing their mental health and talking it out, because it alleviates a lot of broken hearts. And maybe if there was a more healthy environment back in the 1930s for Paul McCullough to air his grievances, maybe he would have lived longer, and maybe the comedy team would have survived into the 1950s.
You mentioned something there, and the reason I'm going to bring it up is I'm thinking this is something I didn't know, and I'm thinking if I didn't know it, there might be some other people who don't know it. You mentioned Movember, Geno, which is Mustache November, I guess. But then you also mentioned it in relation to shining a light on men's mental health. Now, I didn't know this. I thought Mustache November was just people growing mustaches for shits and giggles. I didn't.
No. It's definitely connected to men's health. It's also connected to prostate cancer and other issues that predominantly affect men.
All right. I had no idea. So
people will raise money. They'll sometimes they'll grow mustaches, and people will pitch in money, and it'll be donated to men's health issues.
Okay, so we should probably move on to our next Clark and McCullough now, as the former. Now that Nick's been reassured that his hard-on was an authentic hard-on. We can move on to Waltzing Around, which is the other two, again, from the Ralph Celentano collection. This one a bit longer, about 29 minutes, maybe.
Yes.
And is this the only survive? Well, if you discount Belle of Samoa as well, is this the only other surviving Fox Clark and McCullough short, Geno?
Yes, and this is sadly the only surviving film from their particular series of films that they were making. I mean, Belle of Samoa it is an excellent film with Clark and McCullough, but it wasn't part of their regular ongoing film series.
Right, so a bit of an outlier, isn't it?
Right. So Waltzing Around is therefore more indicative of the films that they were making at around that time. They were even turning out films that could even be classified as mini features. I believe their film In Holland from 1928 could be classified as a featurette. I think that film was clocked in at around 4 reels. And the last time that film was reported as being extant, I believe, was sometime in the 1960s. But this is their only surviving. At least it has both sound and picture. My friend, one of my friends who operates the Joseph Blow YouTube channel, he has uploaded the soundtrack to one of their films, which is 1928's The Bath Between. And I believe he has also paired it up with the ongoing script continuity as well. So so that'll give you a taste of another one of their films that they appeared in during this time frame. But Waltzing Around, yes, is the only surviving film in the Clark and McCullough Fox series proper.
Right, and you're right. It's more. I think it's a stronger dose of their kind of brand of anarchic comedy, right? So this one is again, simplicity itself, really. After disturbing a poor farmer's greenhouse.
I do like this late middle-aged delinquent.
It's great. Boy, this
vibe.
is fun. Several times.
In their 40s, they were like my age, like their late 40s, like just wandering around making trouble and breaking in people's windows.
But when they get into it, it's what I like about it is you really relate to it because yeah, boy, this is fun, and you feel it. It's like, yeah, that does look it does look tempting. I mean, I know you're a farmer and all that, but yeah, that does look like a fun day out in the country, right? Smashing some poor guy's greenhouse to bits. But after that, so they basically end up trying to get into this a boxing match, and they manage to get themselves in there as peanut and pop vendors, right? Who get in the way and cause trouble, of course, as Clark and McCullough, Short wouldn't be up to much if they behaved themselves, right? And end up knocking out K.O. Hogan, the unknockoutable K.O. Hogan. So McCullough has to end up in the ring. Clark is the referee, and like they say, for what do you want for $3? A civil war? One of the but this is a lot of fun. I thought, how can I say, there's a certain brand of comedy from this era which is neither full on slapstick and neither is it overly cerebral and witty with
it's not just wordplay,
the Groucho line every few seconds. It's just fun and kind of silly and
breezy.
And it's not all. Sometimes it is, but it's not always necessarily witty exactly either. But it's just fun. You enjoy being in the company of these troublemakers, and that's how I enjoyed waltzing around. It's just a good time. From the beginning when they start smashing this poor guy's windows in, you're like, why am I enjoying these kind of assholes, really? Why am I enjoying their company so much? This is fun. And for the next 29 minutes, it's just, it's a lot of fun. I mean, how do you feel about that? Again, let's just go to Nick first. I'm sure Geno has a lot more to say about it, but just as the newcomer, I'm wondering how you got on with this compared, now that you've calmed down after Belle of Samoa and you've sorted
right. Yes, there are no belly buttons, sadly, in this.
You've returned from the long spell in the bathroom and you settled down with waltzing around.
As I said, I love the idea of these two late middle-aged delinquents just getting in trouble. The whole opening lengthy because it is proper, anarchic, good fun, right? And then there's certain running gags I enjoyed. The Clark's dead leg gag that comes up a few times where he starts rolling around and swinging this pins and needles in the air.
That's a good example, right? Of that's not a particularly really well written gag.
It's not very cerebral.
No, it's
just funny.
Seeing him hit himself with a stick every now and again is just funny, right?
And then so one thing that actually struck me, and that thanks to Geno, I wouldn't probably have caught it, but I am a big fan of the Disney Three Little Pigs cartoons, right? So Geno, I'm right in thinking that in the intro you mentioned that the Big Bad Wolf is an actor in this.
Right, he is the announcer calling the matches.
Wow. Okay, so I would never have guessed that because the announcer is very Martin Short sounding to me. He's much more kind of whereas the Big Bad Wolf has got a terrifying, raspy voice in those early Disney cartoons. Okay, that's wow, crazy.
He's very funny as well, actually, as the ring announcer.
Yeah, he's brilliant. I said it was just tons of fun. Lots of knockabout kind of stuff. It almost reminds me of, in that way, of what I liked about Clive and I often talk about English comics of our childhood, things like the Beano and the Dandy and that kind of stuff, which has that kind of knockabout, slightly anarchic kind of quality, I guess. It's fun, it's silly, it's you feel like you're getting away with something almost. The characters are and you are by enjoying what they're getting away with. It's like a chance to vicariously experience the things you want to do, but we can't do because we'll get in trouble.
How many, this being a surviving one, Geno, how long was the run of Clark and McCullough shorts at Fox? Like, how many are we missing? One of how many is this, do you think? And do you have any idea if it's representative of the others, or I mean, would it have been considered one of the better ones, one of the so-so ones, one of the lesser ones? Do you have any context for it?
I really can't say. And of course, we really can't say now because of the survival rate of these things. If this is, really indicative of their broader series of films, I mean, it's indicative of their comedy, certainly. But something that's kind of important to note here is that McCullough wrote a lot of the material as well for some of the Fox films, and because of that, it makes the loss of them all the more tragic. And it's also worth noting that this short was directed by a man named Harry Sweet, and Harry Sweet was a comedian in his own right. I highly recommend. There's a beautifully made short film from the early 30s called Just a Pain in the Parlor, where Harry Sweet plays this Olympic athlete who is staying at a home of a wealthy man. And Monty Collins, I believe, is a butler. And there's a whole bunch of Hal Roach people in this. I believe Charlie Hall is also in it as a supporting player. And Harry Sweet was a hilarious man, and unfortunately, I think we lost him in the early 30s in a rather bad airplane accident. I believe he died in a plane crash. And but as far as how many we're missing, I don't have an exact number, but Clark McCullough made films between 1928 and 1929, and so we're missing quite a bit.
I mean, that's got to be at least, because they were probably fairly predictable. That's got to be at least a dozen, maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
Huh. That's interesting.
There's one line in this that actually made me wonder. There's a part where somebody offers, I don't know if they offer Clark a cigarette, but he says, "I never smoke shroud pins." And I'd heard about, which was like, it was a great line, first of all. And then I'd heard about like coffin nails being used, right? Old slang for cigarettes, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, it was shroud pins. Just was that another, or did he make that up, or was that another existing?
Well, that's a good example of something that's probably, again, there's a certain percentage of this stuff that just flies right over our heads now, right? And you do have to pay attention, I think, sometimes to these shots, and they bear watching again, because things like that do jump out at you every now and again. Like, hang on, I didn't pay attention to that the first time round, and it gets you to thinking. So that there's certain things that just fly right over your head. Right.
It also just made me think about cigarettes generally, because I was like, the fact that people used to call them coffin nails shows that people back in the 20s and 30s did know that they weren't good for you. And yet it took till like the late 80s for the tobacco companies to finally be forced into
this idea that people had no idea that smoking was bad for you until you put it on packets is fucking ridiculous. People have known forever that it's not good for you, right? Like,
right.
But
yeah, cool term anyway. Shroud pins. I'll definitely start using it in my general conversation.
I might start smoking again just so I can ask.
Just so you can say, would you like a shroud pin?
It's better than calling them fags.
Fair enough.
That's true. That doesn't go down well
anyway. In Canada. Can I bum a fag takes on a very different meaning if you're in New York, I assume, than London.
Yes, indeed.
Also the opposite. You end up very lonely on a Saturday night in the UK because no one knows what you want. You walk, hey, can I bum a fag? And they just keep handing you cigarettes.
Cigarettes.
I want to sodomize a homosexual. Why don't you understand what I want?
There's actually there's actually an Andy Clyde short from the 30s where he actually says, "Hey, can I get a fag from you?" And I believe he's in jail or something. I forgot the name of the short film, but he does say that, and it's worth mentioning that Andy Clyde was a man of Scottish descent. So so it's interesting how words like that take on whole different meanings in contemporary time. But there you go.
So I have to say I was fascinated by if I don't know if we're done talking about Clark and McCullough, I was fascinated by this like crime doesn't pay except for sometimes short for a whole bunch of reasons. So I don't know if we're ready to get on to
I'm happy to move on into the world of crime.
To the lineup. Yeah, this was I was talking to Jennifer about it just today. I was like, this one really threw me for a loop because it didn't end in any way that I expected it would. I think I had this clear idea of having seen just reading crime comics and watching crime things like basically, like, I'm not wrong, right? There's this guy who runs a nightclub and he's refusing to get in on the whole speakeasy selling booze. It's prohibition times, right? And he's not going to do that. He wants to run an up and up proper place. But they're on hard times, partly because he won't do that. And so he gets approached by somebody who's like, yeah, well, if you do me this favor, I'll give you $5,000, which is an enormous amount of money at the time. Just no questions asked. And so he's basically asked to be a message courier. He's passing a message on to another guy. Turns out the message is a hit. He gives it to the guy. This guy goes off and murders whoever he's supposed to murder. That actor, by the way, first of all, his name was Bum Chiggers. That's the character name. That's appalling. A whole bunch of them. Aren't chiggers some kind of little mites?
Also, you don't want to have bum chiggers. That sitting down is very hard. Also, what I like about him is after he's a very sarcastic character, and he's like, yeah, give me the message. And when he leaves, he goes, "Be good to your mother," which is a line that made me laugh.
So yeah, Bum Chiggers anyway goes off, I guess, and off-screen murders this guy he's been told to kill, then gets caught, tells the police who...
I believe the man he was murdered, his name was Anal Tix.
Oh yes, of course. And yeah, so he ends up then giving up the name of the intermediary, who is our main character, right? This is it William Black is the actor, or is that the character's name? Is it Edward?
Actor name.
Yeah. Okay. So Edward Farron is the name of the character. Anyway, he then ends up having to go to the police, and he's in a lineup, and then So I was kind of thinking, well, this is going to end with him being like, oh, yeah, I didn't know that I was doing something wrong, but I still did something wrong, and I benefited from it financially. So it's going to be one of those stories where, like, just don't take on a job that seems sketchy to you because, ignorance is no defense against the law. But instead, it's just like, yeah, basically, it turns out that the mafiosi kind of guy who said the whole thing is actually a police officer, which is the other thing that blew my mind in 1929, that's the twist. Spoilers, sorry. And, and then shoots him in the lineup for having exposed the fact that it's this cop. And then the guy is told, like, it's all right. You didn't know. You're fine. And he gets to just get off scot-free with having unwittingly orchestrated someone else's murder. And then they grab the crooked cop guy. But so those two features, the fact that, like, it wasn't the kind of, like, he goes to jail and is sad because he screwed up, even though he didn't mean to. That didn't come to pass. But also the fact that it was a police officer who was the villain. That's like a Wire style, like, twist that I was not expecting in a movie made in 1929 at all. I thought that was very daring of the screenwriter to try that. I can't imagine that would have flown, or maybe 29 was a different time. I don't know, but I think 20 years later, that would have been like, you don't do that. You don't ever make the police seem like they're villains.
Yeah,
that's my take.
yeah, you don't get to that kind of level of police corruption and still they start pumping out film noirs, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I thought it was really interesting, and again, very like what are the earliest crime? Like, is this one of the earlier crime films? Like, I mean, what?
Well, you would have had W.D. Griffith and stuff like Musketeers of Pig Alley and stuff back in.
Oh yeah. Okay, got the silent ones.
Yeah, there is, and there is a. I mean, again, unfortunately, much earlier than this, you are picking through the carcass of what's left, right? So who knows what it so it's difficult to tell. But yeah, it would have already been a genre.
A genre, yeah.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I want to give a big shout out to my friend Ray Cabana, who supplied me with this film to publish on my YouTube channel, Geno's House of Rare Films. The lineup does come from the Ray Cabana film collection, of which there's a multitude of crime cinema and horror films, crime films, you name it, he's got it. You know, where Ralph's specialty and niche is in comedies, Ray's specialty is in crime films and horror films and film noir and mysteries and what have you. He has a special affinity for guerrilla films, as a matter of fact. So you and him would probably get on really well, Clive.
Oh yes.
And Ray has been at it for probably the same amount of time that Ralph's been collecting films, where upon 60 plus years of film collecting. And his favorite author being, I believe, S.S. Van Dyne, and Ray can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong with this, but his favorite author being S.S. Van Dyne, who penned the Philo Vance series of novels. And Ray has contributed to the liner notes of the Philo Vance radio program. He founded the magazine, the short-lived film periodical K-Scope magazine, which I believe I brought up on Yakiseni Soba when we did our discussion on Flash Gordon.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And he also co-authored the book, The Films of Peter Lorre, for Citadel Press. So Ray, Ray is even though he's not a well-known name, he is a name, and I think he deserves recognition for being an expert on crime cinema, and he is a good friend, and he deserves his recognition. Whereas people like Eddie Moeller have garnered so much attention for being a sort of a master on film noir and whatever on TCM, people like Ray Cabana are sadly neglected, and I think Ray deserves more critical praise and more attention for what he's been able to give to the world of cinema and the world of especially crime cinema and his studies on it. I mean, he has done so much studying on crime fiction in general that it could fill a book. So Ray, if you're out there watching this, thank you so much for allowing me to publish this film. And there's also another film of Ray's on my YouTube channel, which is the trailer for the film The Bishop Murder Case, starring Basil Rathbone from 1929. I believe it's from 1929. And that's also, I believe, a Philo Vance film.
Yes.
Long before William Powell assumed the role. And Ray is just an expert in crime cinema and horror films, and you name it, he's got it.
And also, same as with Ralph, an open invitation at any point if Ray Cabana wants to come on and talk for himself. He's more than welcome. And yeah, I hope he's putting together a Gorillas of Cinema encyclopedia as we speak. And you have your first customer right here.
So Geno and Clive, do you have anything to say specific to the movie? I mean, I know I kind of talked all over it there, but do you guys have anything you want to add to the lineup? I
like the lineup itself. The lineup scene I found kind of fascinating as well. The fact that the witnesses wear those like black
domino masks kind of thing.
Yeah. So they can't be spotted. And then the criminals themselves are quite a motley crew as well. I mean, it's a very questionable lineup, seeing as they're all so totally different from each other. Like, but no, it's an interesting one because, like you said, Nick, it starts off a little bit like it seems like it's going to be a bit of a preachy little goody two shoes film, and then kind of mutates into something else, kind of quite different. As to your notes, the opening notes as well, Geno, you were saying, one of, is it the only surviving one of a series from Classic Pictures? And were they all going to be? Was it a crime series?
We're not exactly sure. This is this is, and by the way, I also wish to remark while I'm on the floor here that Ray's face when Nick was discussing his amazement at the fact that a police officer was the villain. Ray's face while he was listening to this was probably beaming at that moment because nobody has ever pointed that out in their assessment of the lineup. So I'm glad that Nick caught that because this was, I believe, the first filmed instance of that happening, of a police officer being the main villain of the piece. And so to get back to what you were saying there about the succeeding films, we really don't know if they would have been crime films per se. They probably would have been dramas, but we really can't say now because there is no record of the succeeding films having been produced. They were all to be directed by the director of the lineup, Mr. Charles L. Glett. But there was to be another film called Frankie and Johnny, which the name being based off an old song from the time period. But nobody knows if this film was ever even produced. And Classic Pictures is a studio. You look that studio up. There's nothing about that film studio online. There's nothing in any sort of reference unless you're looking through periodicals of the time. And there's very, very little research. And I want to give a big tip of the hat to our friend, our mutual friend here, Mr. Richard Finnegan, for conducting much of the research that contributed to the lineup. And I wish to come on here right now and actually correct an error I made in my presentation. In the presentation, I state that Ray acquired this film from a private film collector. That is not true. He acquired this from a wholesale dealer, I believe, in films. And Ray could correct me if I'm wrong on this. But it was sort of a bit of a mistaken identity here because the dealer thought he was giving Ray an episode of the old television series The Lineup, which was later rechristened as San Francisco Beat. But he didn't know that he was given this really rare subject that nobody else had ever had before. So the only other time that this film had ever been made available was when Ray gave it over to Greg Luce of Sinister Cinema, and it is available to buy on the Sinister Cinema website. With I believe a Todd Slaughter film also accompanies the disc, but
always like some Todd Slaughter.
Right, and but it is available to view for free on my YouTube channel if you do so wish to see it.
Yeah, it's a shame some of the sound is a bit difficult to hear here and there, isn't it? It's but not to the detriment of the storyline, I think.
Yeah, you can follow it.
Also, it's a very hubristic title to go for your film studio, isn't it? Classic Pictures, right out the gate. I wanted to mention as well, just not to diss this film in any way, shape, or form, but just to kind of put things into context. Again, as interesting as this film, it's quite static if you compare it to. I was thinking about around about the same time, or just a few years later, the stuff Fritz Lang was doing with like the Dr. Mabuse character, if we're talking crime genre stuff. And it just highlights, as if a highlight was needed, quite how ahead of the game Fritz Lang was, right?
Well, to be fair to the film The Lineup, You have to realize that this was a poverty row, very extremely impoverished production. They were never going to produce anything at the level of a Fritz Lang, and I believe that comparing a film like The Lineup to any sort of a bigger budgeted Fritz Lang production is like comparing apples to oranges.
Yes,
I believe
true.
it's
That's
an unfair,
a fair point. Yeah.
I think it's an unfair comparison to make. But
then again,
I will come to the defense of The Lineup here.
But then again, I just wonder, even, and I'm trying to think what a good example would be, but even because obviously Fritz Lang was a visionary, so even if you were looking at like big budget Hollywood crime films of around the same era, I don't think that they would even necessarily come close to doing some of the stuff that Fritz. So yeah, it would be unfair to.
Yeah, I think
it's a valid point, but it'd be unfair to use The Lineup as an example to make that point. Let's put it that way. So yeah, both points are valid, but if we go around it that way, let's not use Lineup as an example. You're quite right. Let's use something else, more big
with a higher budget. Yeah. I mean, when I think about, but I mean, that's it. You can almost think of any director who's attempting to do things that are, you can watch a low budget you can watch a high budget early 80s horror film, and then watch, say, Evil Dead, which is much lower budget, but is doing so many more interesting things in terms of camera movement, camera placement, and the energy of the film, right? And so it's, in that case, it is purely just director, having a visionary director versus a more staid, dyed-in-the-wall approach, And
plus,
so
on an even bigger canvas, you could even argue that it might just be unfair to compare 90% of filmmakers to Fritz Lang as well, because he was, he was one of the greats, right? I mean,
weirdly enough,
the other day, I'd never seen The Testament of Dr. Mabuse before, the 1932 film he made, the first kind of Mabuse sequel. And that film's extraordinary. I mean, I don't know if either of you
I've never seen it. No.
It's just an amazing film, and to think it was made in 1932 is just
But I saw somebody had set a series of film stills from Metropolis alongside matching film stills from Blade Runner, and I had no idea that Blade Runner recreated multiple images from it just brought home how crazy it was to be able to have accomplished that then.
And Metropolis is still a better, more entertaining film than Blade Runner.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
So right. There's The Lineup out the way. So I would quite like to go fishing next, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. You want to hold Jimmy back to the end? Okay.
I would, because I think that's worth discussing at some length. So COBB goes fishing. This isn't sadly Wilbur Cobb from the Ren and Stimpy cartoon series. It's not.
That's a deep cut. I don't even know if I remember that character.
This is Arvin S. Cobb, who I must admit I was not familiar with.
Nope.
Author and humorist, I guess. But he's definitely very much on my radar now, because looking him up, turns out he wrote a couple of stories, horror stories, which were a big influence on H.P. Lovecraft.
What?
Yeah, this guy, Irvin S. Cobb, wrote something called Fishhead, which seems to have been the influence between Shadows over Innsmouth.
I'm writing this down right now.
I thought you might. And then and another one which was an influence on The Rats in the Walls.
What the hell? Okay, that's incredible.
Nothing else that's going to be worth chasing that down. As you can tell from the enthusiastic response there, Nick is, like myself, a huge H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes, yeah. He's Are you
a H.P. Lovecraft
one of my heroes.
Geno? I'm guessing the answer is probably yes, but
I'm familiar with him, but I haven't really done the deep dive into his work.
I'm sure you would probably you should probably do that, because I would imagine you'll get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I would recommend The Call of Cthulhu and Shadow over Innsmouth as being the two stories, and then maybe the Dunwich Horror if you're going to read. And they're all short-ish stories, but yeah, they're all for me, they're the high watermark of horror literature. It doesn't get any better than Lovecraft at the height of his powers. And I want to get down into New England for the sole purpose of visiting Providence and those places where all of those stories are really inspired. At some point, I'll get down there.
So it's
but this COBB fellow is like that. I was surprised by how little his delivery and stuff had aged. It didn't feel like oldie fashionedy to me at all. Like I was quite taken with the comedy stylings. One part where he talks about how he has a sexual magnetism for fish and how the aquarium would be the ideal place for him to. Yeah. I was just like, what the heck? This is really. He's a very avant-garde.
He's a very likable screen presence, isn't he? And so we should mention he's in conversation with Granthud or Granny Rice, right? Who was
Grantland Rice, yes.
Who was a sports writer, right?
Right.
Yeah. Which in itself seems like a slightly. I know you still get sports writers, but it seems like less of a specific kind of. You don't really think of. You don't hear that job description being bandied around so much now, right? Sports.
Hunter S. Thompson was, amongst his other hats, was a sports writer at various times, and really finished his career primarily as a sports writer before he, took his own life, sadly. But yeah, anyway.
So this was a series, and I don't know how many there were, but between 1925 and 1954, so I'm guessing quite a few in this series. Pathé one-reelers, right? It runs about 10 minutes. Where I'm guessing Granny would have been speaking to, kind of. I tell you what this reminded me of, and it's much better than that because that series was a bit self-indulgent and rubbish. But do you remember in the early 90s there was a series called Fishing with John, where people went fishing with John Lurie?
Yes. I was thinking about that too.
Dennis Hopper and I can't even remember Jim Jarmusch and a lot of hipsters basically go fishing with John Lurie and act all sarcastic and ironic and it's mostly annoying. It was annoying in the 90s, but it's like really annoying now. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting if you compare it to this. This is much more fun.
Way more charming.
Yeah.
If you had told me that I would really enjoy a sports writer talking to a fisherman in a boat for 10 minutes, I would have been like, nope, that's not likely to be the case. And yet, particularly because I had, quick aside here, when I was in high school, I won't name the person's name for fear of, legal blowback, but I had a social studies teacher who was maybe the worst teacher I've ever had in terms of just showing absolute contempt for the class. So he would come in and
his name wasn't Social Fong, was it?
No, it was not.
Okay.
It was not at all. No, he came in and he would just put a video on. He would stick a VHS cassette into the cassette recorder and he would leave the classroom, get into his truck and drive out of the school parking lot, and he would go fishing. And it was just like, it was an absolute FU to us as students. We were grade 11 students, and it was just like, he just didn't care about the job. But he had written a book about gilly fishing. I think it was called The Gilly. So I guess if you can figure out who it is from that hint, you can Google that, I suppose.
I quite like that
one. I mean, he might as well just come in and unzipped his pants and just peed all over the front row. That was the level of just like, screw you people. I don't care about you, this job, any of this. And he was one of the best paid teachers. He had his master's degree, which, at that time was relatively rare for a high school teacher. And his wife would sub for him. So if he ever actually decided to take the whole day off to go fishing, his wife would come in so he wouldn't lose any money. He had gamed the system perfectly. And
he's a man to be revered and looked up to. He's got his shit down.
And you knew he never read anything you handed in. If you handed in an essay or a project, he would have read the first paragraph and the last, because I had people who would just put in gibberish in the middle 2 or 3 pages. And they would come back with either a good mark or a bad.
Who wants to read crap written by children? This is a great man.
So to just finish this, basically, you know, that teacher gave me a pretty dim view of fishing, and my own incredible incompetence at fishing as well has, like, not that long ago, a couple of years ago, when I was living on the reserve, you know, the Anishinaabe people or the Ojibwe people are I don't want to be too generalistic, but generally speaking, pretty good at fishing. It has been their primary kind of one of their primary hunting sources for many generations. So we went on a fishing derby, and me, you know, Irish white man, with my wife and a couple of other folks in our boat, and there was various other boats, and I manfully struggled to reel in a rock. I somehow managed to connect my hook to a piece of lake weed, and like really fought hard to land this. And all of the, you know, indigenous folks were like, "Holy crap, white man!
Good eating that night
on that rock." Yeah,
they were enjoying fish over there, and your little group had a stone on a barbecue
with some lake weed. So there was anyway. So
yeah, good for your health.
So yeah, fishing is definitely not my thing at all. And so yeah, I was stunned that I enjoyed this short as much as I did.
How about you? Do you know, is this a fun watch for you, or is it purely, you know, because I can imagine some people might, okay, it exists, we need to preserve it, but I'm not gonna, this isn't my, I can kind of see why someone might not enjoy this, but how about you? Is this something that appeals to your, is this a good time for you, or not so much?
Well, for me personally, I mean, the whole idea of fishing, I mean, I love to fish, but I don't get to do it quite often. As a matter of fact, I haven't done it in years. This is a short that would actually more or less appeal to my cousin Tony. And I want to give a shout out to my cousin Tony Vaccaro. He is a brilliant fisherman, and as a matter of fact, he has won many awards for his talents. And so this would probably appeal to him.
Better than Nick, then.
Yes.
Yes.
But most people, yeah, almost all people are better fishermen than me. Anyway.
And so I enjoy the short for the purely historical context of it. The fact that you have probably one of America's greatest humorists, you know, in a boat with one of America's greatest sports writers. And it's very interesting to note that this is a very rare on-screen appearance for Grantland Rice. He wasn't in any of the other shorts.
Right.
So this was a very rare on-screen appearance for him. And of course, he bore a daughter named Florence Rice, who was a daughter, who was an actress later. Yeah, and of course, Irvin S. Cobb being a contemporary of Will Rogers. As a matter of fact, Will Rogers having starred in Judge Priest, which was a Irvin S. Cobb work.
Right.
And of course, a lot of Irvin S. Cobb works were turned into films by John Ford and other directors. Yeah. So it's a historical piece, and for me, I enjoy it purely on that level. I'm not going to say I necessarily find Cobb funny, but I do enjoy his asides, and I do enjoy the camaraderie that he seems to have with Rice.
So I must
have would have continued this.
So sorry, so I must have misunderstood this. I understood that Granny Rice maybe wasn't on screen for any of the other shots, but was he totally? Was he connected to the series other than this one entry, or was he? Did he provide like a narration or a script for the other ones, or is this the only one with any Granny involvement at all?
Well, no, they were Grantland Rice Spotlights. That was the name of the series.
Right, that's what I thought.
So he had some hand in the production of them, and I'm sure that he had a hand in the production of the scripts and the production of the films and what have you. But this is the only, in fact, on-screen appearance that he has in any of the films that he ever produced.
So he may have provided, I don't know, voiceover or something, maybe for some of the other ones, or if any of the others exist.
Perhaps.
Right.
Perhaps. I mean, to be honest, Ralph would probably be better to speak to that than I would.
Okay.
But this is, in fact, his only on-screen appearance.
Right. Right. One last thing on this, because obviously we didn't know much about him, but you sound more enthusiastic. Are you familiar with Cobb as a writer then, Geno?
Only briefly. I've only skimmed through some of his works, and you can definitely see, how people like Will Rogers were influenced by that. But yeah, I mean, it's great to see two great. It's like a meeting of the minds, sort of, to have Cobb in the boat with Rice, and you know, I think it's just a great historical piece based on that. I mean, that's the great thing about this endeavor that I have had with Ralph, is that we've gotten to, I've gotten to see things that I would have never otherwise seen, like with people in not only film history but also history in general that we would have never seen otherwise. Like Irvin S. Cobb and Grantland Rice just in a boat fishing. What?
Right, right.
Like we would have never seen things like this if it had not been for this endeavor. And it's been fun researching this stuff and getting into the weeds and really doing my research on this.
Yeah, no, I agreed, and that unfolds into this as well. I probably would not have watched COBB Goes Fishing either.
Nope.
So, but it was, but I'm glad I've seen it. I
Me
quite
too.
enjoyed it.
I would have liked to have spent the afternoon in the boat with them, not trying to fish because I can't, but I would just happily have sat and listened to them talk and enjoyed the afternoon, I think.
Right. So this brings us on to the final film we're going to be talking here, and this is well, Geno, why don't you introduce this?
The final film that we're going to be discussing tonight is a film from 1929 entitled The Singing Brakeman. This is a Columbia Victor gem, meaning it's been produced by Columbia Pictures in association with the Victor Talking Machine Company. And the film centers around country singer Jimmie Rodgers in his only film appearance.
And am I correct in, I wrote down here, but I didn't write it. Is this one of 26 musical shorts that Columbia Victor produced, and they were all done twice, right? Not just this one. Is that right?
Correct.
And do we know what the impetus behind redoing them all was? So we should say, so we're going to be talking about, there's two versions. There's the 29 and there's also the 1930 version. And you can view both of them really on Geno's channel. And if also the 1930 version is on this fun DVD, which I recommend, from Yazoo, called Times Ain't Like They Used to Be, Early American Rural and Popular Music. And this has got Jimmie Rodgers, Whistlers, Jug Band, Bob Wills' Texas Playboys are on here. A lot of quite cool stuff captured on this DVD, which I recommend. But do you know why they basically redid the whole series? Is there a specific reason for it,
There isn't any definitive reason that we've been able to unearth, but my hypothesis is that perhaps they redid these films with more of a cinematic eye, with more of an eye towards making them more cinematic. Because if you watch my demonstration at the end of the presentation of The Singing Brakeman, you will notice that in the 1930 version, as opposed to the 1929, there are more close-ups, there are more pans, zooms. There's more of a understanding of cinematic language with the 1930 version of The Singing Brakeman. But that's not to discount or discredit the 1929 version, which is also worth watching.
Because I was wondering whether it was something to do with, because obviously 29 into 30 are talking about, pretty much sound becoming to dominate, taking over from the silence, right? So I'm wondering so you're thinking it might have been that reason, as opposed to some sort of forgotten to the ages jump in maybe sound recording that had happened around this time? That could potentially be something.
That's very possible. I'm not going to rule that out, but I think it's because they wanted to make it more cinematic. That's what I think, but I'm not going to rule out your assessment either.
Do you know if any of the other 25 films in this series exist?
I think some Columbia Victor gems exist, but I have yet to see any of them.
Okay. Any idea? Sorry, putting you on the spot without asking in advance, but off the top of your head, do you recall what any of the other artists might have been?
Not off the top of my head. No, I apologize.
Okay, no, that's fine. Anyway, so this is a difficult thing to. It's a difficult thing to review. Sorry, before we get on to kind of. Also, the other interesting thing as well is, of course, that they're both apparently directed by two different people, right? There's a different director credits on the 29 and the 1930. But
using the same script, like word for word, right?
Yeah.
And the same songs and more or less.
Actually, before, excuse me for interrupting here, but there's a very slight differences in script even between the 1929 and the 1930. You will note a gentleman walks past Jimmy Rogers and the two women, and in the 1929 version, Jimmy Rogers says, "Hello, Billy." In the 1930 version, he says, "Hello, brother." So there are differences between the 1929 and 1930 that extend beyond the directors and the crew involved.
But who knows? I mean, that could have been Jimmy Rogers forgetting the guy's name the second time. Hello,
ad-libbing.
Yeah, you never know.
But I definitely noticed the woman in the background like was blocked differently in the two. Like one, she's much more present and she's kind of framed in the window or in the doorway in one, and then she's kind of much more invisible in the other version.
Right. You're referring to one of the two horrible women who basically blackmail our lead into performing for free for them
an entire concert
until they give him he just wants a cup of coffee, man. He's just woken up. He wants a cup of coffee before he goes to work, and they're like, "Dance, monkey, dance." He even says after a second, "How's that coffee getting along?" And they just, "Oh, it's on the way. Why don't you sing one more song?" Times were hard. Poor Jimmy Rogers as well died at 35. I didn't realize until you pointed that out. Died that
crazy young, yeah.
Massively talented. Like, just because I remember when I was weirdly enough, when I wouldn't have been listening to anything when I was 13, 14, getting into punk, really getting into music and starting to just listen more broadly. I think my mother asked me, she had a Jimmy Rogers LP, and she wanted to be able to listen to it on cassette on her little portable cassette recorder on her headphones. And she said, "Oh, could you copy this for me on the, the record player upstairs?" And yeah, okay, whatever, mum's old music, I'm not going to be enjoying this. And I remember putting on a Jimmy Rogers LP to record it and just listening to the first few minutes, and I was like, "Oh, I like this." Weirdly enough, I like this old time kind of what I would have referred to as old cowboy music or something at the time. But and it was all, I think it was often I think someone in my family had a 78 as well. I'm still able to just about play 78s on that old record player. But it's a fascinating little artifact. Like you said, it's the only time you're really going to get to see Jimmy Rogers perform, and it's interesting to see how you can tell, even without knowing anything, not being a musician, he's so effortlessly good.
Oh, yeah.
Like he's just, oh yeah, I'll just sling out a few, amazing songs before I have my cup of coffee in the morning. Like I know it's a contrived setup, but still it feels very authentic.
He's so comfortable.
Yeah.
So charming and so a master of his craft. That's what I took away from it, was like, this is somebody at the height of his powers who but has that kind of like, yeah, baby, like I'm just gonna
proper rock star, right? Proper rock.
Yeah, absolutely. A 1929 cowboy rock star. And this is kind of pre-country music, right? This is that weird era where you've got like blues and country. It's all just folk music in a way. It hasn't quite diverged into its various branches that it kind of, you know, goes off in. Like you can hear like Lead Belly and that stuff. It's all
Right.
To me, it all runs together in a way. All that music, it's just great music.
Yeah, yeah. Also, obviously, according to this song, Jimmy Rogers not you know, generous with his party favors because he offers a brakeman a line of coke.
What the?
That's one of the
Okay.
lines of the song.
Wow. Yes. All right. I assume that meant the other kind then.
Well, yeah, this was in the days, I guess, before the FDA came in, right? This is your Mystery of the Leaping Fish, you know, yeah, Coke any day and all that.
Okay. Okay.
How about you, Gino? Are you a Jimmy Rogers guy?
Before I transferred this film to YouTube for Ralph, I had never heard of the guy. I mean,
Okay.
I mean, I had been somewhat of a fan of early country music, being a fan of early B westerns. I had gotten myself into the weeds a little bit with people like Ken Maynard, for instance, who was one of the first singing cowboys of the screen. But I had never really heard of Jimmy Rogers before this. But after watching this film a few times, I've really grown to enjoy his music. I mean, here's the thing. I'm a guy who's mostly an 80s music man. I mean, I love 80s heavy metal and hard rock. I love 80s Italo disco. I love 80s music. Anything 80s music I love, like synthesizers and everything. But I also do like to go back in music history. I mean, I like stuff like The Temptations, who were my gateway drug to music in many respects. But I even like to go back even a little further than that. And listening to Jimmy Rogers, I'm not necessarily sure if his music will ever adorn my Walkman when I go out for my morning walks. But his music is really listenable and it's really good. And he is extremely effortless. And to what you're saying there about his presence and everything and how comfortable and confident he is, it really makes it a dirty, rotten shame that he never got to transpose these talents to film again, that he died so young, you know, and in this sort of sound film infancy like this, because I could have easily seen him transposing his talents to like Vitaphone shorts later on, or even if he had lived long enough into the Soundies era of like the 40s and such, you know, or making an appearance in like a musical film as a performer or whatever. He really was comfortable on screen. You know, he's not like a lot of other performers where you could tell that, you know, they're more used to the stage than looking into a camera, but he's really comfortable on camera as well, which is really fascinating to watch.
I guess he doesn't have because the thing is, you could compare him to someone like another great yodeling star of the screen, Geno Cuddy, right? But of course he was. Well, I don't know if you could say which one he was, whether he was primarily a film star or primarily a recording star. But having those two strings to his bow, obviously there's plenty of on-screen Geno Cuddy. So yeah, Jimmy Rogers just being a musical performer and not an actor. You know, it's interesting. You could try and imagine an alternative world where Jimmy Rogers had his own series of westerns as well, right? Kind of, but I don't know. He looks kind of. I can see why he's a bit. I don't know. He doesn't quite look. He's a bit gangly looking compared to your beefy kind of western.
He's more Harry Dean Stanton.
Exactly.
If I was going to imagine somebody playing him in a movie, I would have been a younger Harry Dean Stanton. Would have made a great.
That's a very good call.
But yeah, no, it's funny too because there's a musical quote. I think I hadn't really heard the music before, but as soon as he went into the T for Texas, T for Tennessee, I was like, this is like there's a quotation from this in a Half Man Half Biscuit song.
Yes, which I ripped off at the beginning of
T for Talks to T for Tennessee.
T for Thatcher, that girl who made a wreck out of me.
Oh, okay. It was that's what I thought. Okay, yes.
Which I further appropriated.
Right, to make it the most recent failed
Thanks
prime
for
minister.
pointing out that I'm
sorry.
Ripped off other people's material.
Oops. We can cut that. We can cut that part. But actually, this is completely an aside. But Geno, do you know Cerrone? If that's how you say his name. He might be French, not Italian, but he's another disco guy from the 70s and 80s. Mark Cerrone. Yeah, French. If you don't, I would recommend Love in C Minor. It's batshit crazy. It's a great, just like, what the hell? I mean, to be honest, all of his album covers, you should just Google Cerrone album covers because they're all wonderful. But that album is actually a great
How
disco album.
are you spelling Cerrone?
Cerrone.
I've certainly heard the name. I mean, I'm a fan of stuff like Fancy's Slice Me Nice, Miko Mission's How Old Are You, Dan Harrow, Tom Hooker, Gazebo, Eddie Huntington, The Flirts, Divine, and all that stuff. So if it's anything like that, and
of course, Oliver Onions' soundtrack for Raiders of Atlantis is another of your.
Well, to be honest, anything by Oliver Onions is well worth your time. I mean, those the D'Angelis brothers they're heroes of mine. They will always be. But no. Anyways, I'm sure you can easily find it on YouTube. Just and YouTube Clive. Then, if you haven't heard it as well, Love in C Minor by Cerrone. Check it out ASAP. It's tons of fun.
Way to go there. I think we're all tangented out.
Yes. We'll rein ourselves back in.
Are we? I mean, apart from, and I'll put the link below. Apart from, encouraging people to seek out these things for themselves and many others, treats on Geno's House of Rare Films. Anything else? Does anyone feel as if they've left anything out? Anything they missed? Anything they want to mention? Now is the time to speak, or forever hold your peace.
I think I'm good. Geno?
We shall just go ahead.
If we are indeed wrapping up the program, I do want to again thank Ralph Celentano for his generosity in providing me with these rare films to share with the future generations to not only enjoy but study and analyze, as we've done here tonight on the program. And I also want to thank my friend Ray Cabana for supplying me with the lineup and the Bishop Murder Case trailer, because he too deserves his time in the spotlight for his contributions to the study of classic film and classic fiction in general. Both of these men are titans in the film collecting world, and I believe that they deserve their praise. And I believe that these films deserve their own reappraisal. And Clark and McCullough in particular, being a comedy team that I love, and being a comedy team that's been much maligned throughout the years and deserves to have their work reappraised. So I want to thank both Clive and Nick for having me aboard on this program. It's been really fun discussing these classic films that nobody's ever really seen, and it's great to be amongst friends and talk film, and thank you for having me aboard.
No, thank you, Geno, for curating, and I'm sure you'll be back again soon to talk about something else. And yes, again, thanks, Ralph and Ray. If either one of you want to come on and talk to us directly, you're quite welcome. Ray, if you're shy and you want to do it in your gorilla suit, even better.
We can all dress as gorillas for that one.
Yes!
I would love that.
We should definitely do a gorilla suit special. So until that fine day, see ya.